And up first this week is going to be Greenways Goblins Resurrection Quest Book Number 1, written by Daniel Scheenhofen. It is 392 pages, $2.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. And here's the author's description. Gamers everywhere share a hidden desire deep in their hearts, that their mundane, humdrum world be replaced by ones they play in. When freakish storms envelop the earth, people start disappearing without a trace. Wild theories abound. Is it aliens, spontaneous combustion, or perhaps quantum entanglement? The only ones who might know are those who have vanished. The only ones who might know are the ones who have vanished. An average group of gamers is setting up to start a new campaign. The storm rages across the world, but they only care about the game they're about to start. Little do they know that they would be next to disappear from the face of the earth. Shifted to a different world, the group of friends find the gamer's dream they had always harbored has come true, but not in the way they had hoped. They are not there as themselves, but as the level 1 characters they had been preparing to play. Standing on a road with the smoke rising in the distance, they would soon be given their first quest, but not the one they would have chosen. And there's a warning saying the series contains dark themes, including but not limited to suicide, torture, slavery, and worse. So there you go. Full disclosure, I received an advance copy for review. I purchased a copy when it became available. Okay. This is a much more comedy-heavy novel than the author's other series. The novel stows good dialogue and banter that the author is known for. There is no sex or even romance in this particular series so far. And it's a very much an action-adventure-oriented kind of story. So that's going to be a departure from the author in some respects. And that'll be very pleasant for some people and some readers. I'd say that the story leans a little more towards fantasy portal fiction, but it still manages to bring the tabletop RPG stuff through, even though there are no notifications and there's no character sheets that you see until like the very, very end, like after the novel, like the author shows character sheets, but that's not actually part of the story. It's more like, what are they called? Appendixes or something. Instead, the author actually uses the characters to bring out the RPG mechanics and the stuff, the game mechanic stuff. The characters talk about their class powers, their spells, and the game mechanics that I recall from when they made their characters. So things like when everybody rejuvenates health, because there's no like actual magical healing here. When does that occur? And they test it out, and how do their powers work, and how often can they use them per day or per hour, or how long it takes to recharge, that kind of stuff. That's all things that they're essentially remembering in the story, and that's how the author's bringing them to the reader. But it doesn't stop there. There are regular references to the story of their powers being used by name. So when like some character has a super duper punch power or something, it'll use the correct name of it as it's been described by the character earlier in the story. So there's definitely mechanics. They're just a little more not front and center, but they are shown on a regular basis in the story. The story is dark, though, in a few places with several characters not even surviving the very first book. I was initially personally just kind of put off by the large cast of characters from the very beginning of the story. There are 7 main characters in the novel, and I was like, oh, that's a lot of people for my very limited brain power to kind of remember and keep track of. And it was very, like I said, is definitely off-putting. Then the story doesn't really spend a ton of time in the very beginning of the novel, giving you time to get to know the characters necessarily before throwing them into like the RPG, tabletop RPG world. But by about the 15-ish% mark, the 7 main characters are broken up into 3 distinct groups. And that actually made it easier for me to get to know the characters, just because those 3 different groups went off and did different things, separate from each other. And they would have conversations that would, kind of tie the different characters together. But before that, I genuinely was confused about who everybody was, what their relationships were, what their personalities were. And that's just because of how quickly the story dropped these characters into this world who suddenly look different than the characters as they were described in the real world. So it just made it, I actually ended up having to like write names and who they turned into as far as like their tabletop characters and their relationships and everything. So I had to actually take notes. I'm like, that's not great as far as like saying that these connected to me otherwise. But again, after the 15% mark, it got much easier just because the character groupings got smaller and more manageable. And as the story goes on, you get more backstory, you get more opportunities to see who each character is. And so it's easier to remember them. I was after that 15% mark, I enjoyed it a lot more. And so if you're finding yourself struggling in that initial section of this novel, I say just kind of push through it and keep going, because the story does get easier to manage as it goes on, and things get much better for me, at least. There are also like some very fun references in the story for litigation authors. Like Shinoven kind of name drops a ton of people who in the community and authors who he's friends with, and I thought it was kind of cute. It's one of the little like funny little things. Though I don't personally appreciate the terrible things that the author did to Fubble in this story. Overall, though, it was entertaining. It's a little more slice of life in that there are goals to the characters. But there's not like major, like, oh, it's time to save the world kind of thing. There are series goals for the story, and there were definitely like quest goals. I don't want to like spoil things, but they're definitely quest goals that the characters want to do before they move on. But it feels a little more slice of life in that the author's establishing the world, what the rules are, how it's different from the tabletop experience they were expecting. But for me, like I said, it was a very action-oriented, lots of action, lots of good fighting. Like I said, gets a little dark occasionally. And if you're into that kind of stuff, I think you'll enjoy this. I did. I found it very entertaining. Gets a score of 7.6 out of 10 for me. That's Greenways Goblins Resurrection Quest with a score of 7.6 out of 10.